G3 Assistance through Virginia's community colleges is your pathway to a new future. Get a skill. Get a job. Get ahead. Learn more at vccs.edu/G3.
This is a CBC podcast.
Hello, I'm Peter Armstrong.
And I'm Chris Howden. This is As It Happens, the podcast edition. Tonight,
Exodus strategy. As hope of evacuation by air runs out in Afghanistan, a reporter at the country's border with Pakistan says the number of people trying to make the crossing has quadrupled in recent days.
unclear and present danger. A group called ISIS-K claimed responsibility for yesterday's deadly bombings in Kabul. And while the ISIS offshoot isn't familiar to most of us, our guest warned of an attack like this months ago.
Unprotected. A U.S. Supreme Court decision ends a federal moratorium on evictions, leaving millions of Americans, including our guest, wondering how long they have until they're out on the street.
The wind's always blowing in a yeasterly direction. The Vegemite factory in Melbourne, Australia has been given official heritage status, and with it, the smell of the distinctive spread as well.
In the skies disguised as guys, researchers discover that some adult female hummingbirds have a new strategy to avoid being chased and harassed. They've adopted the bright feathers of their male counterparts.
And fragrant disregard for safety. An Ontario teenager moved quickly to courageously rescue a skunk with a cup stuck on its head, and a few days later she didn't waste a second rescuing a second. As it happens, the Friday edition, radio that saves a little sprayer for you. By now, the world is all too familiar with the harrowing scenes out of Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. Thousands of Afghans desperately awaiting evacuation to Canada, the U.S., Europe, and elsewhere as their chances of boarding a plane grow slimmer. But while the world has had its eye on the airport, tens of thousands of Afghans have been making for the country's border with Pakistan, despite the fact that Pakistan has said it will not accept new refugees. Syed Ali Shah is a journalist with Quetta Voice and a former bureau chief for Pakistan's Dawn News. He's reporting from the busy Spin Boldak Chaman border crossing into Pakistan, and we reached him today in Quetta.
Syed, can you begin by painting a picture for us of what's been happening at the Spin Boldak Chaman border crossing this week?
Yes, actually, comparatively, when we look at the past, the number of Afghan nationals entering into Pakistan that has increased almost 3 to 4 times. And apart from this, the volume of trade, it has also increased. And apart from this, when it comes to Kabul, Herat, and other major Afghan cities, what I observed, so many people, they are also coming from these major Afghan cities, and they are also crossing Pak-Afghan border Chaman.
And just give us some insight into who these people are. Why are they going to the border right now in such big numbers?
There are 3 types of people. First of all, one tribe is living on both sides of the border. One part is living in Afghanistan, one part is living in Pakistan. So there is a movement of these people. And apart from this, trade, the volume of trade, it has increased. There is formal and informal trade between the two countries. It has increased in recent. This is one type of people. A second group is the people are from southwestern Afghanistan, including Kandahar, Zabul, Nimroz, Farah, and Helmand provinces. Now peace has returned to all of these former troubled provinces of Afghanistan. They are also coming to Quetta, Pakistan's southwestern city, for medical treatment. So their number has also increased because the health sector paints a very bleak picture in southwestern Afghanistan, rather in entire Afghanistan. And the third, that is because of unfolding events in Afghanistan. There are people, they are also coming from northern Afghanistan, central Afghanistan, the ethnic Shia Hazara community, which has been repeatedly targeted in Afghanistan, Kabul, and similarly, it has also been targeted in Quetta. And apart from this, the people are also coming from the northern areas of Afghanistan. I tried to speak to these people, but they preferred not to comment on the situation inside Afghanistan.
It's interesting, though, and I think it would come as something of a surprise to a lot of Canadian listeners to hear that trade has increased, that at least some parts of southern Afghanistan seem actually more peaceful now since the Taliban have been able to take over. Are you saying that has enabled and allowed more people to travel than people who couldn't travel like that before?
You're absolutely right. I mean, when we see drastic change, earlier this southwestern Afghanistan, it was very troubled region. I mean, there were fierce clashes between the former Afghan government's forces and Taliban. It was order of the day in Kandahar, Zabul, Helmand, Farah, Nimroz, and other troubled provinces. When now Taliban has taken control, there is complete calm now. So that is the reason, Afghanistan is famous for fruits like pomegranates, grapes, and other fruits. So they are also being exported from the southwestern Afghanistan into Pakistan. So that what I saw, the trucks loaded with vegetables, dry fruits, and fresh fruits. So that is also one of the reasons. And now, earlier, the Afghanistan's northern belt or central Afghanistan, they were peaceful compared to the southwestern Afghanistan. Now, the southwestern Afghanistan is more peaceful than northern and central Afghanistan.
So we have those three groups, the border communities that are taking advantage of a more peaceful time to travel again, people, as you say, seeking medical help. But then, as you mentioned, these people from Kabul and northern parts of the country that are fleeing out of fear from the Taliban as well. How many of the people that you saw at the border this week, how many are in that last group that are running from the Taliban, that are concerned about what's happening with the Taliban takeover?
I mean, the officials, the border authorities, they said that for a whole day they are coming.
Wow.
So it can be in hundreds and thousands. We don't have the exact number because Pakistan has not given refugee status to the Afghan nationals entering into Pakistan. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, they have also announced that they would provide all possible assistance to Pakistan government if it decides to formally host the Afghan refugees. Now these refugees are coming. As you know that Pakistan is already hosting more than 3 million Afghan nationals for last more than 4 decades since the USSR's aggression in Afghanistan. So, I mean, a generation of Afghans, it has grown up here in Pakistan. So these Afghan refugees, they have good relations here with the Afghan refugees who had come 4 decades ago, 3 decades ago. First of all, they are trying to live with their relatives. If someone has no relative, then they are trying to go to Karachi, Pakistan's largest city in terms of population, and they are getting, homes on rent.
But as you say, Pakistan has announced it's not going to formally accept any new refugees from Afghanistan, at least for the moment. And there are already millions of Afghans in the country who arrived during previous crises. So what kind of support does Pakistan need from the international community to deal with this situation?
Pakistan has already faced the brunt of Cold War in terms of the influx of Afghan refugees. More than 3 million refugees, they are already living here in Pakistan. I mean, they have also impacted all sectors of Pakistani government or society. Now, if the fresh refugee influx, after this, it is going to be another additional burden. So definitely Pakistan needs an international support, and it also needs the support of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Because Pakistan, it is one of the developing countries. Pakistan is already faced with financial issues. So Pakistan would indeed need financial assistance from the international community to support the Afghan nationals coming into Pakistan.
Syed, we really appreciate your insight into all this today. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Syed Ali Shah is a journalist with Quetta Voice. We reached him in Quetta, Pakistan. In the middle of a COVID outbreak in the United States that shows no sign of ending, one key protection created to help people during the pandemic is about to disappear. Yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court ended a federal moratorium on residential evictions. The ban was originally put in place by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, but for months it's faced challenges from landlord groups. Angela Alvello is on her landlord's eviction list. We reached her in Kansas City, Missouri.
Angela, what was your reaction when you heard that this moratorium was ending?
I hit my knees and I prayed to God this morning. I said, "Dear Lord, where now? What am I going to do? What am I going to do for my family? How am I going to save my family from being homeless, Lord? I let my car get repoed to pay my rent. I go hungry, Lord, to pay my rent. I do everything we can, even after we buried my brother-in-law from COVID. And I've personally suffered, and my daughter just suffered this past month, Lord. Show me, where do I go? And what do I do now, Lord?" That's what I did.
And Angela, I'm really sorry that this is happening to you, and I'm really grateful you're willing to share this with us. But what are you going to do? You prayed to ask those questions this morning. Do you have any answers?
I don't have any answers. Like I said, at this point, I was hoping that we had until October 3rd with the memoriam. Because like I said, my son just got, and my daughter and all of us just got over being severely ill. All of us girls in this home has autoimmune systems disorders. And if I don't find shelter for us somehow, some way, we're going to get very sick. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. Money's very tight. I'm on disability now because of my illnesses, because of the duress. I don't have answers.
Now, your eviction case is unique in that you've actually been paying your rent on time, but your landlord still wants you out. Why is that?
There's history. I worked here as a collector, an administrative collector. I refused to evict families between August and December that were sick. I refused to even sign my name to that paper to turn over to the attorney, turn over to the courthouse to evict families that needed help. I put my own neck on the line, and I printed out those CDC declarations. I knocked on those people's doors, and I handed them the CDC declarations and said, "She wants me to evict you. I don't want to. You need help. Not to be homeless. You need help. Please fill this out and send it in to me today. It's very important. It has to be today." All families filled it out. They send it back in. That stopped her from evicting them for a moment. And I don't care. I'll do it again if I have to save over 2 handfuls of families from being on the street. And ever since then, she's had it out for me. On June 22nd, she gives me a 60-day notice to vacate. I asked her, I called her, I said, "Why is this?" She says, "I don't have to give you a reason." I'm like, "Okay, if that's your final answer, okay."
And with all of that already, and now you have to deal or face the potential of being evicted, how long do you have until that eviction deadline? I have 4 days. 4 days.
Just like many other people around the world, we have 4 days. They think they have a homeless issue. What's fixing to happen, a homeless issue is going to double, if not triple. And this is working class folks trying to make it, that has had setbacks because of illness. Not only just the COVID, the variants, it's multiplying. This ain't even halfway over. And if the governments don't do something, people are going to die.
I want to ask you about the government because the Supreme Court said in its ruling that the CDC overstepped its powers to enforce this moratorium to begin with, and that an extension would have had to come from Congress. With that in mind, do you have hope? How hopeful are you that lawmakers will be able to step in and do something for families like yours?
CDC knows more. The Center of Disease Control know more than most people do. They do things to protect us. And when they got our president behind them, wanting to protect us, there is a reason for this. Where's the humanity? Their homes are being repoed. The evictions are doubling, if not tripling. Does this say something? I'm a member of the Kansas City Tenants. It's a nonprofit organization. Every single one of us has battled this and has been done unjust. That's our support. I just pray really hard for everyone around the world to have peace and know they are not alone. There's a lot of us in this situation, and we all need to band together, and we need to go into Congress. We need to go into our governors, and we need to make a statement. We all, every single person, no matter if you're a U.S. citizen or not, every single person should be guaranteed safe, affordable housing.
Well, Angela, listen, we're all really grateful that you're able to share this with us, and just really worried about you. And I hope these next 4 days you find a solution, because this is a huge problem. Anyways, thank you so much for speaking with us today, and we really do hope for the best over these next 4 days for you.
And thank you. You have a very good day, sir.
You too.
Angela Avello is one of many people at risk of being evicted in the United States after a U.S. Supreme Court decision. We reached her in Kansas City, Missouri. Four years ago, we spoke with Sarah Dennis Cucci. She was part of a group of Indigenous students calling on Ryerson University to remove the statue of its namesake and change the school's name. Egerton Ryerson is considered one of the architects of Canada's residential school system. That statue was removed after being toppled during a protest in June. And yesterday, the school agreed to scrub his name from the university and adopt a new name next year. Sarah Dennis Cucci is still a student at Ryerson University. She's a member of Nipissing First Nation. We reached her in Toronto.
Sarah, what went through your mind when you learned that Ryerson University was going to finally change its name?
I was actually really excited, almost equally as excited as when the statue came down.
Remind us what happened when you and a group of Indigenous students called on the school to change its name. That was, 4 years ago now?
There were quite a few calls to action that the Indigenous Students Rising and the Black Liberation Collective had written in an open letter and sent off to the president's office. And it was very intense. There was a lot that happened on social media with Ryerson Student Union. There was a lot of acts of racism that were happening, and it was, it was pretty traumatic in a lot of ways, but I think it was one of those necessary evils where, the pot just needs to get stirred more and more, and it just got messy, but now good things are happening.
It's interesting, though, to look back at that time, because there was this sort of galvanization around the idea, but, the statue didn't come down. The school didn't change its name after that work.
Yeah.
What do you think's changed?
It was really frustrating.
Right.
I think a lot has changed. We've gone through a pandemic, and people have had to put their lives on hold in a lot of ways. People are beginning to focus on things that actually matter, like social justice and It's taken a lot of people in dire straits and a lot of very strong-willed people coming together to, make necessary change and to hold people up.
Back then, when you guys were first pushing for this, you spoke with As It Happens. And I'd like, if I may, to play just a short clip from that interview. Let's take a listen here.
People have been occupying this land for the better part of 13,000 years. And none of the names of our institutions or a whole lot of things that are reflected in our popular culture and structures really reflect that. And that's a problem. And I really think that it's a problem that should be addressed and that people should not resist change when it comes to that, because it's not hurting anybody and it's actually helping people feel like they belong, because we do belong here.
I wonder what it's like for you, Sarah, to hear that, to hear it now, knowing what we know today.
Well, I mean, it's great to hear that. Thank you for replaying that, because I think that's like a really important message that still needs to be, held up. Like, one institution changing a name will hopefully start a trend, but, one institution changing a name can also be seen as very tokenistic, and it's probably not going to translate to the way that folks interact on a day-to-day basis, because racism has a long way to go before it's completely unlearned from our core beliefs. There's a lot of upheaval about, from alumni that their degrees are no longer valid, that they won't have a popular name on their degree. And it's, in my opinion, it's like a pretty mundane issue compared to actual social liberation. And contrary to a very fragile popular belief, like our degrees and the work we do to achieve them are certainly not being made invalid with this name change.
They seem quite willing to change the name now. What was the argument back then in 2017 that seemed so impossible at the time?
Well, it was similar to the reason why they didn't want to take down the statue. Their argument was like, the whole issue related to marketing and people's degrees, and, Ryerson was, should be a name to be proud of because he started the public education system. And it was just a lot of very sort of wishy-washy reasons to uphold, basically the name of a colonizer who is implicated in acts of genocide through education and lack of health care to a lot of children who died.
In that clip, you also talked about how changing the names of buildings and of landmarks could be seen as tokenism, but it will also help Indigenous folk feel like they belong.
Absolutely.
So
100%.
What'll it mean for you walking the university and walking campus with knowing that there's a new name attached to this now?
Honestly, despite, the bitterness of it being somewhat tokenistic, I also am going to be proud to have graduated from a university that was once, quote unquote, popular for a colonizer's name, and also popular for actually living up to its mandate of valuing social innovation and equity. This day and age, we're so powerfully driven by social media trends and influencers, siding with white supremacy is not hot. So I'll be happy to receive my degree as opposed to wanting to hand it back, saying change the name on it.
I also think of some young student who's going to step onto campus for the first time that won't have to go through what you went through thinking about this and having it weigh on you and having it make you think about, well, what is this institution to me if it's celebrating this name?
Well, it will be one less thing, that's for sure, because epistemic violence is real. It's just a part of the plethora of things that Indigenous, racialized, and any person that identifies as a member of a marginalized group is going to experience in a colonial institution. So it's certainly one less thing to have weighing on your mind.
I don't know if you've had a chance to think about this, but do you have any ideas for what the new name of Ryerson University should be?
It would be cool if it was, named after a prominent Indigenous figure, or even a name that is in local Indigenous language like Anishinaabemowin, Wendat, or any of the Onkwohome languages. That definitely is not something that I as one Indigenous person, feel comfortable suggesting, because I feel like it should certainly be a collaborative event that is held by community.
Well, it's been quite a journey from the last time we spoke to you, and I'm sure glad we were able to get you back on again today.
Yes, thank you for asking.
Sarah Dennis Cucci is an Indigenous student at Ryerson University, and we reached her in Toronto. And you can find more on that story on our website, cbc.ca/AIH. There's nothing quite like it. The unmistakable scent of a radio studio. 1 part old carpet, 2 parts dusty electronics, 1 part Axe body spray. Oh, that's me. Honestly, though, what I wouldn't give these days to smell something else, anything else. Ideally, the kind of fragrance that one can only get by getting away. Scents are so much a part of travel, after all. The citrusy smell of southern Italy, the evergreen purity of an old-growth forest, the fragrant florals of Japan's cherry blossoms in bloom, the yeasty pungence of Vegemite on a morning in Australia. Okay, the last one's not for everyone. Just lovers of the spread Wikipedia so appetizingly describes as made from leftover brewer's yeast and, quote, various vegetables. And now, thanks to new recognition from the city of Melbourne, Australia, apparently made of official heritage value. That's because of the city's Craft Vegemite factory, which just earned protected status. And according to the National Trust of Australia's Felicity Watson, it's not just the factory that's of historical significance, it's also, quote, the smell coming from it. So the factory and the olfactory. Well, congrats, Melbourne. And if Vegemite is your bag, you can celebrate by doing what Australians do when they smell Vegemite at breakfast time and raise a toast. 2 pieces if you're hungry.
G3 Assistance through Virginia's community colleges is your pathway to a new future, helping those who qualify pay for school and train for the right career, right where you are, right now. Learn more at vccs.edu/G3.
Hi, I'm Michelle Shepard, host of Uncover Sharmini from CBC Podcasts. In 1999, 15-year-old Sharmini Anandavale disappeared on her way to a job that police believed didn't exist. 4 months later, her remains were found in a wooded ravine. I revisit the case that has stayed with me for over 20 years, ever since I first covered it as a cub crime reporter for the Toronto Star. You can find Uncover Sharmini on CBC Listen or on your favorite podcast app.
The U.S. is forging ahead with its evacuation efforts at the Kabul airport, a day after a deadly suicide bombing and a warning of more to come. Some reports put the death toll at least 95 Afghans and 13 U.S. troops. A group called ISIS-K has claimed responsibility. Also known as ISIS Khorasan, it's a militant group based in Afghanistan and Pakistan that counts both the U.S. and the Taliban as sworn enemies. Most people will have just heard about the group, but Andrew Mines has known about it for much longer. And earlier this year, he and other terrorism analysts warned of an ISIS-K attack like the one we saw yesterday. We reached Andrew Mines in Washington, D.C.
Andrew, what was the message you think ISIS-K was trying to send with this suicide bombing in Kabul yesterday?
Well, the message was really clear. They're trying to show that the Afghan Taliban are not able to provide security to the people of Afghanistan and in the country at large.
I think most people obviously know what ISIS is. I'm going to bet that this week was the first time a lot of people had heard the term ISIS-K. What is this group? Who are we talking about?
So ISIS-K, ISKP, ISK, I know people have probably seen a lot of acronyms at this point, but It's the Islamic State in Khorasan. It's the Islamic State's official branch for Afghanistan. It used to be Afghanistan and Pakistan, now it's Afghanistan. And so it has been officially recognized by the core leadership in Iraq and Syria. It formed in about 2015 by a merger of basically spilidos from other groups that were operating in Afghanistan and Pakistan at the time.
And do we know specifically what their kind of stated purpose is, their goal?
Sure. Their goal is to really be a beachhead, to be a strategic pivot for the broader Islamic State movement in Central and South Asia writ large.
How did this split with the Taliban come? I mean, there's a pretty deep-seated hatred now among these two groups.
There has been for quite some time, virtually since its inception. ISK has both poached fighters and senior leadership and mid-level leadership from the Afghan Taliban. It's also targeted the Afghan Taliban in different places throughout Afghanistan for years now. These two groups are pretty much strategic rivals, if not bitter enemies at this point.
And in the ramp-up to the Taliban taking control of Afghanistan in the last week and a half or so, did we see even more Taliban fighters defecting over to the ISK side?
We hadn't seen that much. In fact, what we had seen actually is, and my colleague Abdul Said has covered this greatly in his own kind of coverage of the group. A lot of members from the Haqqani network in particular, and others throughout kind of urban networks in Kabul specifically, who were kind of, disaffected with what was going on in the peace talks in Doha in particular, were starting to join ranks with ISK and help it perpetrate some more lethal attacks these last several months. I think just today we found out that the prison break that happened, ISK's ranks have swelled by some, I think, 2,000 members. The U.S. officials have put that number in the thousands. So their ranks have just been boosted.
You and you mentioned one of your colleagues in the terrorism analysis. There had been some warnings that an attack like this might happen. What were you seeing leading up to these last few days that was giving you cause for concern?
ISK had appointed an urban warfare expert. Their attacks really started to increase in the end of 2020 and then the start of 2021. And throughout 2021, we've seen some of the most horrific attacks that the group has perpetrated since its inception. We also saw attempts on the U.S. envoy's life to Afghanistan. We saw that at the start of the year. And so the group's been very lethal and very ambitious in its attack strategy since he took over as the head of it.
And so leading up to the bombing yesterday, was it just that we saw this group growing in sort of boldness and in attacks and a bit of a power vacuum as the Taliban took over and Western forces withdrew?
So really the last month or so, there's been some chatter and some warning from ISIS channels, ISK channels, I should say. But operationally and then kind of in the online space, they've been relatively quiet. They have certainly been a bit jealous of the Afghan Taliban's perceived victory over the US-led coalition, right? And have continued to brand them as collaborators with the West, as traitors to the broader jihadist kind of movement, and as nationalists that don't stand for what they are trying to implement, which is a global caliphate. But the last month or so, people had basically said that, okay, they're kind of taking the back seat and they're going to wait this out, or they're planning for something. And I think we saw the culmination of that yesterday.
The Taliban is clearly in control in Afghanistan, but it's not like they had to fight their way in. They were barely challenged as they took control. With that in mind, how formidable of a threat is something like ISK to the Taliban, especially this early in the Taliban's tenure of being in control of the country?
They're not an existential threat yet, right? What we're not going to see in the short term is across the country, ISK going district for control with the Afghan Taliban. What we are going to see, much more likely, is ISK continue to try to poach Taliban fighters, poach from the thousands of foreign fighters that we already know are in Afghanistan, and continue to attack Taliban targets, civilian targets, and to show that the Taliban are not anywhere close to being a guarantor of security.
U.S. President Joe Biden said he was going to, quote, hunt down the ISK attackers who carried out the bombing. There's just days left before the U.S. will be officially out of the country. What ability now does the U.S. even have to fight this threat?
The ability is pretty low, and I think defense and intelligence officials themselves have noted that. They noted that as part of this process of withdrawal, we were going to lose those assets on the ground that can identify those targets. We don't have assets really in country to carry out operations once those targets have been identified. to eliminate them. I think a lot of officials are starting to come out and say, well, we'll do this and Biden himself said this, we'll do this at a place and time of our choosing. That could be months now down the line, that could be years down the line. But in the immediate term, it seems highly unlikely, at least for now, that we'll see some kind of major U.S. air power campaign or anything of the sort.
And at the end of the day, as we saw yesterday, Afghan civilians are always the ones that suffer the most, with now Afghans being squeezed on both sides by the Taliban and ISIS-K. What are your concerns for the weeks and the months ahead?
They will likely continue to bear the brunt of this, as we saw yesterday, unfortunately. It's tragic. The security situation already was incredibly precarious, is going to remain incredibly precarious. And that's not just at the Kabul airport. Afghans are trying to get out of the country through other routes too. And so those are also, unfortunately, likely targets for ISK.
Indeed. Andrew, appreciate your insight on this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Andrew Mines is a research fellow at the Program on Extremism at George Washington University. He's in Washington, D.C. Like most people, when I see an animal in trouble, I want to help. I do. It's just also, like most people, I don't want the animal to wreak havoc, and I myself don't want to wreak at all. But 16-year-old Sophie Wilson of Burlington, Ontario, is not like most people. She didn't think twice about stepping in after she caught sight of a skunk with its head stuck in a cup. And she didn't think twice a second time just a few days later. Sophie Wilson and her father, Scott Wilson, told CBC Hamilton what happened.
We were just sitting on the swings and I saw a skunk go kind of under the playground. And then I saw it come out and it had this cup all around its head. And I just kind of knew that I had to do something because it was dragging its head down and it couldn't really walk and it couldn't see properly. So it got to the point where because it couldn't see, it just kind of walked right over to me and I was able to take the cup off, but the lid was stuck on there really tight. And I followed it around for almost an hour just trying to get the lid off. But then it ran into someone's backyard. So I couldn't go after it and I lost it. But I was really upset about it. So I went home and I told my parents what happened. And my dad said that he would come with me and he would help. So then the next night I went over with my little brother and my dad with a net. And I was able to find it again and catch it. And then I was able to cut off the lid.
Something crazy happened, and this really shows the need for people to recycle. So basically, 2 nights ago, Sophie was out with her friends, and she was at the Shoppers Drug Mart, and another skunk basically got its head into a cup and was in danger and choking. And Sophie actually ran over and helped it. So she saved 2 separate skunks over the span of a week. And we couldn't believe it. But I guess, with people throwing things not in the proper garbage or recycle and leaving things around, I believe the animals are attracted to the smell or the residual food that's left in the containers, and they just can't help but stick their heads in there. And it's a really dangerous thing, I think, for not just skunks, but any animals that are trying to feed by poking their head into people's litter, essentially.
Yeah, I was out with my friends the other day too, and I was like, okay, we're going to go to the park, and we're also going to go to Shoppers Drug Mart just to double check, make sure everything's all good with the animals. And it's just it's something that I feel like I have to do because the garbages, they're so full, and it's so easy for so many different animals to get in there. And I don't think I could live with myself if I didn't make sure that I was doing the best I could to make sure animals were safe. During the second rescue, the skunk did spray, but it didn't spray directly at me. It kind of just sprayed behind and got a little bit on me, which was, it was terrible. I smelled really bad and I hated it. But, as long as I got the stuff off, I didn't really mind it.
Burlington, Ontario teenager Sophie Wilson and her father Scott Wilson describing her daring back-to-back skunk rescues. They spoke with the CBC's Dan Takema. If you're a female hummingbird, you have to put up with some pretty jerky behavior from males. There's the pecking, the chasing, and the body slamming. Now researchers have found that some female white-necked Jacobin hummingbirds have found a way to stave off that kind of harassment by looking like the males. Their findings were published this week in the journal Current Biology. Jay Falk led the study while he was a graduate student at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We reached him in Austin, Texas.
So, Jay, what have you been able to see happening with these female birds?
So in the white-necked Jacobins, the hummingbird species that I study, what we've been finding is that the females basically come in two different color types. One looks like the male, actually. So they have bright blue ornamented heads, white bellies, and white tails. And the other type is more drab colored. So they have like a green back and a speckled gray throat and belly. And what we've been able to find is that this coloration, where the female looks like the male, seems to help them reduce the amount of aggression that they experience.
And so, like, if I was to be out there looking at these with you and saw a male and a female who both had this male-like ornamentation, would I even be able to tell the two apart?
Probably not. So even I have difficulty telling them apart in the field. There's a small indication that you can look for if they open their tail, but really 99% of the time you can't tell the difference.
So on the one hand, we have these sort of bright-colored female birds and this other subgroup that has the more drab coloring. What is the difference in the way those two groups of birds are being treated?
Right. So the main way that we see them being treated differently is when we look at aggression towards those two different color types. So for the ornamented type, the blue-headed type, we see less aggression pointed towards them compared to the more drab-colored females. And we actually see the same thing happening with the males. The males seem to experience less aggression. And we think that's because the males themselves may be more aggressive, and we're not really sure about the females that look like the males. But basically what we think is other hummingbirds see these kind of blue-headed females and think they might be males, and they know that these males are bullies. And seeing that, they basically think, okay, I'm going to stay away from them. And that helps them experience less aggression.
That makes sense. That's how we'd all sort of react. If you saw the bully of the group, you just avoid him and go talk to the others.
Exactly.
And I mean, is there a flip side to this, though? Are, for example, some of those birds that are getting less attention, are they also getting less attractive to the male birds?
So based on our experiments, yes. It seems like these drab-colored females are actually preferred in terms of mating preference by the males. But the only thing is that we're not really sure whether it matters or not, because we know that the females that look like males, they also do get courted and copulated. So we see a preference for the drab type from the males, but we just don't know if it matters.
Would it be fair to say they're getting chased more often, but they're maybe just not producing as many offspring?
That's possible, but that's just something we haven't been able to look at yet.
Are there other advantages? Like, I mean, on the one hand, you're getting bothered less, but does that also mean, like, can they get food more easily and with less kind of hassle?
Right, yeah. So in terms of an advantage for the more drab-colored females, we haven't been able to really look at this yet, but just, speculating here, a lot of times we think that drab coloration basically allows you to hide from predators better. So since females do all the parental care in hummingbirds, they do all the nesting, they do all the care for chicks, sitting on a nest with all these brightly colored feathers might be basically calling attention to you and your offspring from predators. And if you look drab, you're probably able to escape predation. So we think maybe the male-like females are escaping attacks when they're trying to find food. And it's possible that the drab females are basically able to escape predation at their nests.
And it's worth pointing out that, this extra attention, as I referred to it, hummingbirds are pretty active. The way that they interact with one another, we're not talking about just a small amount of attention here, are we?
Right, yeah. So Hummingbirds, if you've ever been able to watch them at feeders, they really love sugar water. They love nectar. They love flowers. Hummingbirds are extremely active. They have the highest metabolism of any vertebrate. You may have heard that their hearts beat up to 1,000 times per minute. And so they have very active lives. They need to have constant feeding. They need to have constant source of energy. And so when it comes to nectar, they're sometimes willing to fight for it. And so that's where we think that, being able to reduce just a little bit of aggression probably translates into being able to access food better.
And I think this next question kind of gets to the heart of why you're studying all this. But when they're young, all of these birds have that flash blue plumage. It's only some of the females that keep those feathers into adulthood. Have you been able to figure out why?
So in terms of why we see this shift, it is really interesting that the juveniles seem to, all the juveniles have this male-like plumage, which is really unusual for birds in general. And we know that in itself is probably in order to reduce aggression, right? But in terms of why they then shift so that most of the adult females are drab in coloration, that's something we still don't know. But it may go back to the whole nesting thing where as an adult, you have to sit on this nest exposed to predators. Whereas when you're a juvenile, you don't have to do that whole nesting thing. And your main prerogative is probably just to get food. And, maybe pretending to be a male is the way to do that.
Well, it's not a bad plan. Jay, this is fascinating stuff. We sure appreciate you sharing with us today.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Jay Falk is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Washington. He led a study on the male-like ornamentation of female hummingbirds while a graduate student at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We reached him in Austin, Texas. Picking up a new skill isn't easy. Mastering a new skill and marketing your mastery can take years. Not for 12-year-old Carter Noseworthy, though. All of the above took him a month. Carter was already a gifted sketch artist with an interest in architecture, and when Nova Scotia went into lockdown during its third COVID wave, Carter decided to take up watercolor painting. Now people across the country, and other countries, including Turkey, France, and Singapore, are buying his work. Here is Carter Noseworthy talking to the CBC about his in-demand gift for painting buildings.
Well, personally, I think I'm very lucky because I'm getting paid for something that I enjoy to do. And I think it'll also help me in the future because those great buildings that I like to draw, they've been designed by architects. And I think if I draw them, it'll help me understand them more to design buildings when I'm older. My favorite is probably the Parliament building because the drawing and the painting, I find it goes pretty well together. I didn't do too many details with the windows and with the roof and stuff, but I just like how I arranged it on the page.
And I saw on your Instagram, too, that some of your commissions are like people's houses. So, not any famous buildings, not a landmark that anybody would recognize, but, people's childhood homes or their grandparents' home. How did it feel to, instead of like the Eiffel Tower or Big Ben, draw someone's, the home in Normandy, France?
It made me feel good knowing that they asked me to draw something that they feel connected to, that they like my work that much, that they would like to purchase something that they truly like through my work. So I'm pretty happy about that.
And so you said about 40 commissions so far?
Around that. I haven't really counted, but like that.
Your bestseller was your most popular one. Do you remember?
Kimberly Row, and then I think it was the Peggy's Cove Lighthouse.
Yeah.
More of the original ones that I've drew toward the beginning.
Citadel Clock Tower was big.
Yeah, that one's. I had to paint that like 5 times.
I know. Actually, it got to the point where I had to tell people he may not. We weren't going to make Carter draw something he didn't want, and I said, if you get bored of this, you can say no, And so he never did, but I think after 5 of a certain painting, he would want to move on. So many commissions came in. It actually worked out perfectly. There's 2 weeks left of summer. He has 1 commission left, and he's made 5 prints. I didn't even put it on my Facebook page if anyone was looking for a Christmas gift or whatever. It just would be too much for him. So I think the way it worked out was just perfect.
That was Colleen Noseworthy, and before that, her son Carter, speaking to CBC reporter Brooklyn Curry. You've been listening to the As It Happens podcast. Our show can be heard Monday to Friday on CBC Radio 1, Following the World at 6.
You can also listen to the show on the web at cbc.ca/AIH. Thanks for listening. I'm Peter Armstrong.
And I'm Chris Howden.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.